Welcome to episode 129 of Silver Lining for Learning. My name is Punya Mishra, and I'm joined with my co-hosts Chris Didi, Kurt Bonk, and Young Zhao. Very excited about this episode today. This is the second of three episodes that we are focusing on India, this time on student-centered learning in an Indian context. As we had said in the introduction to the first of the series, which is episode 123, that with 1.4 billion people, 27% of whom are under 15, India has significant educational needs. It's multilingual and multi-ethnic culture, throw in other challenges. So scale, complexity, diversity, it's all here. So today we will meet with two representatives of organizations focused on student-centered learning. Sandhya Gupta, who's at Aavishkar Foundation. And it seems that we might have actually met each other when she was doing her master's in Iowa State University. I know my wife remembers her from then. And Eshwar Bandi, who is with Inqui-lab Foundation. I won't go on and on, but I have to say this, that Aavishkar in Hindi means discovery. And Inqui-lab, I think, gets the prize for the best pun that I've heard in a long time, because Inqui-lab can stand for Inquiry Lab, and Inqui-lab is also the Urdu Hindi word for revolution. So if one title can capture everything that the our guests are trying to do, is, I think, Inqui-lab, bringing revolution to education in India. So with that, I'm actually going to pass the baton on to Sandhya. Sandhya, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and the work that you do, and then we'll pass it on to Eshwar. Oh, I have to add one more thing. All the guests that we have from India, like the two that were in our last episode 123, both of you today, and the two guests who will be joining us next week, all left careers in engineering to move to education, which is also my story. So there is something there which we need to dig into, what makes engineers run for the hills and aim for education, particularly in the Indian context, which I think is I think we should really talk about it at some point. But Sandhya, on to you. Welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit about yourself. Audio is not working.
Yeah.
Okay. So this
Sandhya,
so a little bit about myself.
Okay.
Is this better now?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, let me switch off my video. That might help. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. So I did my PhD in electrical engineering, and then I started working in the semiconductor industry. And my desire to be connected to India, and I started looking for various ways that we could do that. And finally, I moved to India about 12 years ago. I started, along with my husband, I started to volunteer in the school system here, and saw the gap in education that existed. I have loved mathematics and science for a long time. As you said, I'm also an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I decided, we decided that we will do something in education where we can make students fall in love with science and math education all over again. And that's how Aavishkar was formed about 8 years ago.
Thank you, Sandhya. We'll get back to you. Eshwar, a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Eshwar. I am from India, the southern part of India. And like Punya already shared, I was an engineer. I did work with IBM for quite some time. And then I decided to sort of jump into the social sector. I did this fascinating fellowship called Teach for India Fellowship. You heard of it, where I taught in a low-income school for 2 years. And it was there that I started taking real interest in the education space. It was very satisfying for me to be in that space, and there was a lot of learning every day in the classroom. So personally, I decided to stay on. And it's like one of those experiments in the class that worked, like that has turned out now into this organization that me and two other co-founders are running. Uh, we saw the potential students have, and basically how we don't nurture that in the classroom, especially their ability to think on their own. I think we started as a organization that nurtures creativity initially, and then sort of slowly, with a lot more research and collaborations, we have moved to this space where we have identified some skills that focus on problem solving as being crucial, and we are trying to work with students on them. um, Excited to be here.
Thank you, Eshwar. So maybe since we are with you, Eshwar, to go with you, can you give us a little bit of a sense of the context? Because like I said at the start, that India is such a diverse country that you could be in, visited 10 places and still not have captured even 1/100th of the diversity of languages, cultures, religions,
Mhm.
socioeconomic, all that, right? So give us a little bit of sense of the context within which you are working, and then we'll go to Sandhya.
Sure. So again, like you said, it is very diverse, and I don't know how much of context I can capture because I honestly don't understand even in the work we do. Very few schools, and that's all we know of. Um, so we work primarily in South Indian state of Telangana. Uh, Again, it's the newest Indian state. It's not a small state, but like it is one of the smallest. It has around 60,000 schools, maybe. Um, we work closely with the education department there, and we also work with this set of schools called social welfare residential schools, which cater specifically to the most marginalized communities in India. It's a complete boarding school. So our work actually started with those schools post the fellowship, and we have continued to work with them. Students here come from mainly SC/ST Dalit backgrounds, and it's 100% population is SC/ST population. And at the same time, in the Telangana setting, we work primarily with government schools. I can talk about maybe per child cost is around $300, maybe. I think somewhere around 250 to $300 for normal schools going student. In residential schools, it's a bit higher. It goes around 600 to 700. Um, I think learning levels are generally okay, but then it was doing well pre-pandemic, but after pandemic, like every other state, the learning levels have dropped significantly. We have resumed our in-person programs, and we see that students are not able to sort of not just learning loss, but there's a network loss also. Uh, for example, our program is mostly team-based work where they work on projects together. It used to work really well because they grew up together, and then they sort of be in the same classroom over a period of time. But now they don't know them because 2 years they have not seen each other, or these are all completely new students. And then like there's a little bit of friction that exists within the teams. They're trying to understand each other. So um, currently, like this is the current state right now. I don't know if I've captured
Sure.
everything.
No, that's okay. One term that you use, which I think many people watching our show would not understand, which I think Indians would, which is this thing that you said most of our students are Dalit or SC/ST backgrounds. Can you explain what that means very briefly, and then we'll go to Sandhya?
Sure. Okay, I've never been asked this question before, so I'm just wondering how to start. I'll try to say, as far as my understanding goes, it's basically students who come from these communities which were previously belonging to the untouchable group, where, as we know, the caste system exists in India. These people were outside the caste system, like sort of put outside the caste system, so they were not, being involved from a societal perspective. And the context about the residential schools was they were started around 1990s, early 1990s, as especially in Telangana, as a program to uh, give these students everything. including like schooling, education, food, boarding, utilities, school books, uniforms, everything is provided to free of cost. So sort of take them away from their communities and then put them in a setting where they can completely focus on learning.
Okay, that's helpful, because I think, and it comes back to the issue of the caste system and so on, which I think people have heard about but don't really understand the implications of that.
Yeah.
I know, Kurt, you have a question, but I want to go to Sandhya to get a little bit. Sandhya, so can you tell us a little bit about, I think it's Palampur that you're working in, which is a village. What is the context within which you're working?
So, Aavishkar, here we work with students as well as with teachers. And the communities that we serve are rural, remote, and marginalized communities across the country. Our initial work was with Dalit young women, young girls, which Eshwar already talked about. And so we work mainly with government schools and community organizations across the country. Unlike the US system, the government schools in India have students mainly from low-income families. Because in India, the way education system has been, especially in the north, those who can afford it, they like to send their children to private schools. I would say, especially in STEM fields, the quality of education is not great. There is a big anxiety. I think this anxiety around mathematics is a worldwide phenomenon. And that is very true for India also. And that starts at a very early phase. So we, as we have researched more, it is the way we have been teaching procedurally. So the teachers have also learned things procedurally, and as I'm understanding more, I see that it starts at primary level when students get, because they don't understand math, they get scared of it. And as they move further in the field, up in grades, the fear of math makes them move away from sciences. So the STEM fields are not open to them. And this number is very high in our marginalized communities. And these are the communities that we serve. So, so that means we work with rural communities, the lowest of castes, and the people who are or who are outside the caste system, women, and remote mountain communities. This could be also Muslim communities, because we also work with them, especially from very low income families.
Thank you, Sandhya. And I think that one of the themes that is really important for our viewers to understand is the sort of the pernicious history of the caste system and people who are sort of even outside of that. And I think the kind of cultural and social challenges that brings, I think both Eshwar and Sandhya are sort of speaking to that. And I'm saying this more from sort of the setting the context point of view, that, and I think we had a previous episode, Kurt, I'm blanking on the name of the guest that we had who had worked across all the different countries, who just had kids. What was her name? One of your former students, I think.
Yeah, Kendam.
And she spoke about, I think, in the work that she's done about this as well. So just making that connection. So Kurt, on to you. You had a question.
Yeah, if anyone's watching old shows, we ought to show Kendam guy back with Bhutan and Papua New Guinea. I have three comments, quick comments. Sandhya, I think your audio and video are working really good just before you turned it off. So I think you might want to try again with video on, because I think it will work. I'm just guessing. And Eshwar, I wonder if you could close the blind in the window behind you, because it's if it does have a blind, you might want to close that just in case. But both of you have mentioned mathematics, and yesterday I was made aware of a podcast show that's available in mathematics, and so very, very nice, Sandhya. So I'll put the link to that podcast show in mathematics. It's basically a community of math teachers. So you might want to explore it. I don't know. The question I have for you is, coming that you are from another field outside of education and yet are in effect teacher educators now, and you're helping marginalized students, low income, rural students, those left behind in the caste system. That's not just unique to India. Around the world, people are starting to think about, create programs for those that are marginalized in some way, shape, or form, or left behind. I'm wondering if you could tell us, if you were to talk to program directors for those kind of innovative educational initiatives related to marginalized students, what would you tell them are skills or competencies, resources, courses that you would recommend that future teachers who might come from alternative fields, or even from teacher education in general, might need to help those marginalized students? What are the skills that you found when you entered that were critical to your success, that could be embedded in those programs and could help others, and could replicate your successes or extend them in new ways? What would you say would be a couple of things that could be done?
The very first thing that comes to mind is connecting with the student at the level of what they know, making them believe. First, we have to believe in our students that they can learn, and we have to make them believe that they can learn. And other thing I would say, let's teach them in the language that they already know. The third thing I would say is create that safe space where they can speak up, feel confident in speaking up. Does not matter that it's wrong or right. It really does not matter. And continuously inculcate this habit to give the answer and back it up, justify why you think so. If they are able to speak up and able to express themselves, it will not only help them in a science and math class, it will help them in life. And this is the skill if we can build. It is true for all, but especially in our marginalized communities where they don't get this opportunity, this is where I think it's most important.
So you're saying comfort, safety, connecting to them and where they're at, whether it's language or culture, and enhancing their identity as a learner, and making them feel what we call in psychology self-efficacious as a learner, feeling that they can succeed, right? Those are some components of what you would think would be needed.
Yeah, Eshwar was talking about critical thinking.
Critical thinking, I had that.
Yeah. So, it's, I think it's very important that we value every opinion that comes in classroom. Because when our students feel respected and valued, they start speaking up.
So that's 5 things now: value, focus on critical thinking, logic, and in evaluating one's thinking; comfort, connecting to their backgrounds and cultural norms; and helping their sense of self-worth or identity as a learner. Eshwar, you want to add to that or reinforce any of those things?
Yeah, I would like to do both. So I agree with Sandhya on the belief part for sure. Like absolutely, skills are secondary to me. I'll give you an example in the context that we work with. Like when we first took our program, we're just working with 5 schools in social welfare, and the first thing, like not just one, but like all 5 of the teachers told us was like, why do these children need to be creative? Like they don't even know how to read and write yet, right? So it's the context that we work with, and as long as your program is not transferring the belief that you have to the teachers and the system, like basically your program will not work. Like students need to be in that space, like Sandhya said, that space where they feel their opinions are valued, or their ideas are relevant. One of the common things we issue down is, because we are looking for like novelty and uniqueness, and even in small ideas, we're just saying, oh, this idea already exists. It exists for us. It doesn't exist for them. The problem is solved outside, but it's not solved in their world. Like to understand and to believe and to go to that particular level of the child and understand that this is important to this particular student. I think like having that belief is fundamental than anything else. And that sort of leads to many things. I particularly like I think Carol Dweck's like the social determination theory. I think those we rely significantly on those, like the competence, autonomy, and relatedness. I think these are crucial for student to basically believe that. I think these are also related to self-efficacy, right? So where you think I relate with this problem, or I relate with this concept in a way that applies to my world. I think that's important. So that brings the student into the conversation. And then whatever skills, then you bring in the skills, like how do you approach this? You can bring in a process, you can bring in a structure, whatever it is. So that builds competence in the student. And as a combination of these, then basically they feel they can like take on anything, right? So that speaks to the autonomy part. Like these are primarily what I would focus on. And then because skills are very diverse and they keep changing all the time, either the names or forms, so they can come in at any point. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I have a question, but I'll give you a little background first. So in the US, we have a test called the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP test. It's given every once in a while by the federal government, and its purpose is to measure how well schools are educating students. So it's not a test of individuals. It's essentially a test of school systems. And I was part of a committee. I and many others were part of a committee that was formed because the NAEP wanted to expand beyond science into engineering and technology. And so they invited some of us that know something about science, engineering, and technology to interact with the developers of the new parts of the test. And almost immediately, we hit total gridlock that no one could ever get past, because what I and others on the advisory panel said is, well, the way that you measure problem solving and critical thinking and inquiry is you give people a problem, and you watch how creative they are and how well they use inquiry and how well they're able to think logically and clearly about the problem, and that's how you measure engineering and technology. And the developers said, well, that's crazy, because this is a psychometric test. We need 15, 20 items in order to determine whether or not somebody knows something, and one simulation could take up half an hour of a 2-hour test. So can't we just ask them to label the parts of a bridge, or to list the 7 linear sequential steps that are part of inquiry and so on? And of course we said no. And eventually the test came out, and it was psychometric because, that's what tests do. So I think worldwide we have a challenge with measurement and methodology in terms of assessing the areas that you rightly think are absolutely crucial. And I'm not even talking about the affective dimensions or the social dimensions. I'm just talking about the cognitive dimension. Do you find that you get pushback because I assume there's high stakes tests in India that govern admission to some of the elite universities, especially in STEM. How do you try to navigate this issue of teaching things that might not, where succeeding might not be reflected on the high stakes test?
Yeah, very, very true. In India, whatever systems I have seen at, either at the school level or the college level, I did my engineering from India, my undergrad. I think we test for what, we do not test for why. Like, what is the capital of India? Not why Delhi is the capital of India. So what we assess for is what we teach for. So we, in the current system, I don't think we intentionally teach for discovery and inquiry. So the result of that is, even after we graduate from college, if you look at the employability numbers, many of our graduates are not employable. So any institution we go to, in fact, there are some companies, they have opened their own like year-long program that they take the students go through the year-long program to become employable and be placed. So I think, and the new education policy that came out in 2020 has done the policy says that and encourages our institutions now to teach for inquiry-based learning, to teach for investigation, to teach for discovery. But it's going to be a huge challenge, because for that, our bachelor's in education courses would need to change. And there is a huge gap in even finding teachers who can teach for that. So it's a long road, but making that policy was I would say, a very good step. And let's see how we go. So it's a huge challenge for India.
So,
Eshwar?
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Eshwar.
Yeah. Sorry, I just want to understand the question. Like, were you asking us like what it would take to change it, or are you asking what are the challenges in implementing this assessment system?
I'm asking how you navigate that. So you come in, the parent says, I think what you're doing is important, but I also think my kid won't get into IIT or anywhere that really matters because of the test. How do you navigate that kind of challenge?
Right. I think we have skipped that challenge so far, because we don't work with parents directly, and we don't work with schools directly. We are mainly working through the administration. So essentially, even though, let's say we work with 40 schools, what we are saying is we work with one department, which is giving us permission to do this. Fortunately for us, at least in Telangana is pretty big on the innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. So they want to build this new state as something of a model for the rest of the country, and they are putting a lot of money in nurturing problem solving, innovation, critical thinking, creativity, all the 21st century skills at all levels. So primarily we have a buy-in from the administration, but I don't see that at the school level. Like it's still a good to have program for the school, and not necessarily something that is necessary for students. I would like what it would take to get these things to the schools is like schools do not have that capacity. I remember, like, you in the question you mentioned that someone asked you, like, if can you just make it a paper-based test? Because like everything else takes a lot of effort. And I think that's where we are right now. We don't have the capacity in the schools to do this form of assessment. Like we don't even have the capacity to do existing assessments properly. So it's a very long shot.
So you had a question?
Yeah, so my question is really kind of related to what Chris was asking, but probably a different direction. Because, Pune, in India, we've done quite a number of episodes with India, and we've got really almost all of them are from the nonprofit, right? I mean, nonprofit organizations. So that would not be happening in China or in the US, because different countries, different organizations play a big role. So my question really has to do with, when Eshwar and Sandhya were talking about working with schools. Chris was raising the question about parents may have different views. But of course, a bigger problem, I don't want to say it's a problem, bigger issue is how do you actually work with schools? Because when you, like as a nonprofit, when you walk into a school, you would assume schools are not doing everything right. So you could provide out-of-school tutoring for free, or you can provide, you think the schools may not be doing the right thing. You want to go do teacher training. You want to prepare teachers to teach better. Or you may think that the schools are missing some classes, like in the US, we're bringing, AI expert to teach a course. There are many different ways of this. So I was just wondering if Sandhya and Eshwar, both of you, could really talk about from a broader perspective, like how different nonprofit organizations or for-profit organizations work with schools, because school has its own system. And no matter how good or how bad, has its textbook, its curriculum, its teaching, its classroom organization, kids go in, kids come out. So you have to convince governments, you have to convince school principals, school teachers. Just, it's a broad thing. How do you formulate a relationship so we do not go into school and be considered as an interruption? Because many schools will say, you're just coming here to interrupt us. You're just messing up our plans. So anyway, that's just a broad question. Just was wondering about your perspective and your experiences.
Go ahead, Sandhya, Eshwar, whoever wants. Okay, Sandhya.
Okay, yeah, sure. So you're correct. In our state, I'm working in Himachal Pradesh. There we have to take permission from the government, and then we enter schools. So it's not only permission from the government, as Eshwar was already mentioning, that there is a huge buy-in at the state level, but when he actually enters the school, it's not the same thing. So when we work, we have to develop relationships at every level. And when we work outside the state, we have, it's an Aavishkar thing that we do, that we will enter outside the state, we will enter only when invited. So that there is a buy-in, and the state we live in is our state. So there we continuously work on making the buy-in. And I personally, this is not a skill that I'm very good at. So I would say this is the part that I find the hardest. So what we do is we work with the government system in schools, but we also work with many grassroots organizations who are working with students directly, and they need support in because our strength is the content of science and math, technology, and developing engineering challenges. This is our strength. So we educate and empower the organizations and their teams to become better at it. So this is how kind of we handle this problem.
Eshwar, you have any view about perspective on that?
Sure. So your question was basically how for-profits or non-profits generally work with schools?
Yeah, well, it's like Sandhya was talking about, like she mentioned, we have to work with everybody. So I'm actually also have a, kind of follow-up question, from a bigger perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of organizations trying to work with schools. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a bad thing. But how do schools manage you guys? They have to manage. How do they receive you? How do teachers receive you? Do they think you are interrupting, disrupting? Or so really, it's from a broad perspective. I just, was wondering,
Got it.
we have so many people working because apparently India has a lot,
Yeah.
which might be needed,
Yes.
and so how does this kind of affect the relationship with schools?
Yes.
If I were, in India, I feel like if I were a principal, I said, God, there's so many people want to work with me. What do I do now, right?
Yeah. Right. So before I get into that part, I think I need to give you a little bit of context about the schooling scenario itself. Like you have public schools, which are completely government funded. And day schools, and then you have residential schools, the ones we were talking about, which have a different organizing body. And then you have low income private schools. Some of them are aided by the government, but they're run independently. And then you have your mid income and high income private schools. Now the private schools are, unless they are a franchise or a chain of schools, they usually, the school leader has the power to take decisions. So generally they have the control over the calendar, school calendar and everything. So they are able to choose the partners that they work with. And it's mainly they're making decision for one school or like 5 or 10 schools. Now it comes to the government side, it's the decision making happens at a much higher level. Mostly the school leaders in government schools do not have the budgetary control for new programs. So they get budget for running the school, which is like a 9 to 3 academic oriented thing, and some extracurriculars that are already signed off. But other than that, like if I want to directly approach a social welfare school, I cannot do that. They have very little budget and very little control over and autonomy over what comes to my school. So I generally go to the district administration or the secretary office where I get the permission. And then that is where the confusion happens. Like this happened pre-pandemic. We went to one particular school, and then there were like 13 different programs running parallelly in that school. Okay, and it was a nightmare for the school leader and the teachers to sort of give us some time, but they have to, because the MOU is signed and then the order is coming from the top. So they do not have the negotiating power, and also the culture is not one that of pushback. So eventually what happens is all that frustration is channeled toward the people coming in. And it's completely fair, I think. Like Sandhya said, relationship is where if this gets renewed as a partnership, because the administration also looks for feedback at the end of the year, basically what programs work, what did not work. Are we working with everyone, building relationships with them, and then most importantly showing value for the students, because at whatever level teachers and school leaders still see if a student is learning or not, because they have a very intuitive sense of what is happening to the student, especially the ones who generally are not good in academics. If they are excelling at something, they're very quick to notice that. And it's on us to sort of create those proof points and then say we will be of value, and then we want to work with you again. It comes up to that.
So thank you. I know, Kurt, you have a question. I actually want to bring in Punya to have a conversation about this, because as you mentioned, you got 13 programs, right, in the school. So this is, coordination. I mean, really, it's almost sometimes can be disabling to teachers, right? You got, and also another factor is that students only have so much time. So then imagine you guys only have 6 hours or 7 hours. If it's divided by teachers, by curriculum. So I was just wondering, Punya, from your perspective, the outsider perspective, what do you see? Another question, of course, related to say, all the nonprofits, they're not necessarily certified. We don't know how good they are. I'm not challenging you guys, okay? I'm not challenging. I'm just saying, but we don't know. But anyone can do it, and of course, there are people doing this for money as well. You got businesses in this as well. So I was just wondering, Punya, you have a broader, some kind of perspective. You can jump in, share with us.
Yeah, no, just very briefly. I mean, I think both Sandhya and Eshwar sort of talked about the complexity of entering, even, I mean, let's say even with the best of intentions and you have the plans in place, there is a system which you have to enter in some way. And it's a very, there is a lot of bureaucracy involved. So there's a lot of, I mean, relationship, and people get transferred, I mean, the district education officer who you have formed a relationship with gone, suddenly like years of things that you might have built can also vanish. So it is a very complex landscape with a lot of sort of top-down players and policies and so on, which and also a relatively entrenched way of thinking about education, which I think, Sandhya, you mentioned in the beginning, which is that the questions, like the kinds of questions that are considered as being valid questions. Of course, the teaching is going to be geared towards that. Like assessment drives the kind of teaching that you would do. And so you're sort of working both at questioning certain assumptions at that level, as while trying to enter into a space which, will try to protect its own in some way or is sort of rigid in some other way. So it is a complex issue. But I know Kurt has a couple of questions and I'm looking at the time. So this is how the hour flies. I was telling you, the hour just goes away.
Actually,
we are already 40 minutes in. So
yeah,
Kurt, go ahead.
No, I think Sandhya opened her mic up and she has a response to Young. I think, do you want to, I'll let her go
sure,
first.
Sandhya, please.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sandhya.
So I was just wanting to add to what Eshwar had said. So it also depends on a state to state. In a state like Telangana, there are a lot more organizations working and reaching. I am in a mountain state, which as compared to the plains of India is sparsely populated. And here, the number of organizations working in education are very few. So, so we don't have a situation like that. But still, what he said was there is a strong buy-in from the government. Here, that buy-in from the government is not that strong. So, but the relationship at the school level is very strong.
So Sandhya, you mentioned technology briefly when you talked about math, technology, and other things. And here in the U.S., we often see pictures of kids in India utilizing resources that students might be coming from less privileged backgrounds who might not necessarily have teachers, who are utilizing resources that are open, such as the Khan Academy here in the US. We see pictures of that. I'm not sure if it really, I wonder, since many of our shows, we're all educational technology people or backgrounds in it, and we talk about scalability a lot in this show. I wonder if you could mention, so I have two questions, so this one will be brief. If you could briefly mention the technologies that you see being utilized in your classrooms that are effective, impactful, seamless, that are maybe low cost, that are making an impact and making a difference in some way, shape, or form. That would be very informative to the people who listen to the show later, who might be taking in a master's program in educational technology, might be wondering how they can make what they can utilize in terms of technology to make an impact in impoverished or marginalized schools. So could either one of you speak to that?
So when you say technology, do you mean access to internet?
Sure. Anything. Could be
Okay.
Mobile technologies, could be open education, could be e-books. What is it that you see students able to utilize within the settings that you're in?
So the communities that we work with, access to internet is rather low. In fact, when COVID hit, it was we were not able to reach our students who were far away, but only in our neighborhood. because most of them do not have, their families do not have a smartphone. Some may have a smartphone, but their father may be using it. If you are working with girls, and if there are siblings in the family, then boy gets preference over girl. So reaching young kids through technology is has always been a huge challenge. And especially in COVID, it had become very apparent. There are, in addition to that, there is Khan Academy here also and other tools. They are mostly in English. There is work going on. And India has just many languages. Every state has its own language. So, but everything is in English, so it's not accessible to the kids that we work with. So it needs to be in the language that they know. So that is, even if you give internet, that would also remain a challenge.
Eshwar? Go ahead. Do you have something else, Sandhya?
No, that's good.
Yeah, Eshwar?
Yeah, I agree. Right now, access is still a big issue. One anecdote I want to share is like we were working before the pandemic, we were working with around 1,200 students through social welfare schools. And as soon as the lockdown happened, and we lost connection with at least 70% of our students, like we couldn't stay in touch, and whatever we wanted to engage, these most interested students who found a way to like get in touch with us. And we were trying to do some WhatsApp based things because like WhatsApp was pretty ubiquitous in the Indian context right now. We sent a video. So there's this one girl I remember who was very interested in water conservation and waste management. She wanted to innovate something for a community around that. So we just sent a video YouTube link, which was just like 4 minutes long. And for various reasons, like device access, they just had one device at home and her parent was working and she could only get like 1 hour a day, and also buffering issues and all of that. She took more than a week to complete watching that 4-minute video and get back to us saying like, well, this is what I understood and what's the next step. So that's just like one small picture of the kind of issues, especially the students that we work with face, and it's even worse in rural areas. So I think like device access as well as network access are things that need to be kept in consideration before designing something. And then you get into the quality of the videos itself, right? Like you cannot say just because someone watched a video and they have learned something, like what needs to go along with it, like how engaging it is. You don't have Christopher Nolan saying, okay, I taught people quantum physics and wormholes because they watched 200 million people watched Interstellar. Like that doesn't work that way. So we have to sort of focus on what exactly are the learners learning, picking up, and what sort of, even though it's virtual, it is still a space that has to be created for them.
So Chris has a comment, and then I'll ask my second question after Chris's comment and your response to him. So go ahead, Chris.
Well, I know earlier you talked about, both of you talked about the important affective and emotional building up of children and students who've been marginalized by society and probably repeatedly told that they couldn't do much of anything. And I agree with you that that's extremely important, because no matter how many knowledge and skills you give those students, if they don't believe in themselves, then it's not going to have a happy ending. So I'm wondering if you get pushback from people in the society when you talk about your program and you show the kinds of things that students are accomplishing. Do they say, wow, you must have a great program? Or do they say, well, wait a minute, nobody from that group could have done something like this? You must have done it yourself and just kind of let them put their name on it. I'm curious as to whether in the culture attitudes are changing as you demonstrate what these groups are capable of doing.
So yes, it does happen like that, but not to our faces. One thing also happens, if you say that you work for marginalized community, that many people believe that it must not be a high quality program. And so when we say excellent STEM education for all, excellence, we have to almost show it that it is excellent. So, so what we do in our case, we do a program which has a high charge, and we will give scholarship to students and communities who cannot afford it. Because if you charge a lot, then people think it's worth it. So I don't shy away from that. Did I cover everything in your question?
Yeah, I don't know what I can add to that. I think I agree. We do get all spectrum, in that entire spectrum, from like disbelief to sort of deceit, like you are basically cheating us. But the way we sort of tackle that is like volume, right? If we work with a classroom, there are 40 students, and you get on average, they're divided into 10 teams. So you have at least more than 80 to 100 ideas coming out of the classroom every 3 months, and then some of them are being turned into prototypes, and the sheer volume. So then the disbelief is like sort of channeled at us and not at them, because like they're like, oh, these people cannot come up with so many ideas, so it must be the students, right? So that's one way we try to address it. But I think that's a very prevalent concern. No, at this point, we are not concerned about the society as much, because there's very little interaction with the outside world from a program perspective. Our focus is like, how much of this can we show to the school administration, school leaders, teachers, and their parents every day, because these are the people surrounding students, and these are the ones they need to believe in. I think belief in the organization is like not a priority right now for us.
Okay, my other question I was going to ask, it relates to Chris's in some ways and relates to my previous question in some ways. You started to answer it, actually. The last time we had people from India on, I got to ask this question at the very end, and we really were out of time. We're getting near the end, but we're not out of time. So I'll ask this. Could you share with us 1 to 2 success stories of students or parents that you've worked with in your respective settings? Tell us just a couple examples of where your organization or initiative made a difference.
So, Kurt, thank you for asking that, because I was going to keep that for the end. But so yes, yes to Kurt's question. I just want to add another layer to it. So one of the things that's become clear from listening to both of you are the number of challenges that you're facing. And so partly sort of speak to us, if you can, about what keeps you going, like what keeps you motivated in doing this work, because I think there are lots of people who can learn from that as well. So just adding another layer to Kurt's question about success stories, but also sort of the personal tale of yourself wanting to continue to do this work, which clearly is complicated, hard in many, many different ways.
To tell you the truth, never ever had I thought that I would start teaching. I have always, so me and my co-founder, I think we are in love with mathematics and science. Growing up, I remember when I was 9th grade, I used to tutor. And so I tutored till I finished my engineering, and then I went off for a job, and that's when I stopped. And I loved it. And so I came back to India, and I realized, so I have a daughter who is now in college, but when I had moved to India, at that time she was 5.5. I remember going to every school and seeing different schools. I realized that I wouldn't be able to send her. So I put her in a government school, and I started going there myself, saw the problems. So later on, she has been homeschooled, and now she has graduated. And teaching her was just so simple because I didn't really have to teach her. I had to just pose the right problem, and she had to explore. So what I realized that I really love mathematics and science. And I find it just so fascinating that I want everybody to be able to see that. Every student, every teacher. And, science may let you believe that you know it, but because math has a final answer, you very quickly know if you don't know it or not. And mathematics is a language, and this language helps improve the quality of your life. So you have to know it to be able to do better. So I think, like our spoken language, everybody must know mathematics. And I think that is what really drives me. And Chris's question was about success. Instead of students, I'm going to give you success of an aspiring teacher. I remember we run a fellowship program where the young, like me as an engineer who's now a teacher trainer and works with students, we run a fellowship program where graduates come to explore the field of education and see, is this what they want to do? So we have been running this fellowship program for 5 years now, and 100% of our fellows who have graduated have decided to select the STEM education as the field and have stayed in it. One of the young ladies came from a very remote village of Chamba, which is an aspirational district. That means even the government says that the education system is really bad there and this needs to be improved. So she came from there, accidentally landed in Aavishkar, finally applied and joined the Aavishkar fellowship program. She used to be scared of maths, but didn't want to tell us. But as we worked with her, her confidence improved. She started working with students, and she taught through stories. And she really never said to the students that I'm teaching you multiplication or division, but she kept giving them problems and they kept solving it. Her students really, that she was able to make them believe that you can do math. Now, she has graduated from the program, and it has been more than a year. She has started training teachers and aspiring math educators, and she has worked short-term education and long-term. She has worked with more than 1,000 teachers across the country. And she has trained this for 2 years. I'm really, really proud of what she has been able to achieve, in addition to financial independence, which her family would have never thought.
Go ahead, Eshwar.
So I think like I like teaching, and I've seen what students can do, and I also, because our work is in the creative domain and problem solving domain, we come across super crazy ideas every day from students, and I think every time you see one idea you feel a little energized to I think like that's my primary motivation that keeps me going. In terms of success stories, I don't know we can call any of them success yet, because most of our vision is very long term. But we do have some students who have excelled. Like Sriram is a 12-year-old, 13-year-old student. He comes from a family of weavers, and their parents, so they have to they are handloom weavers, and they have to pedal this 30-40 pound wooden beam every day for some like 7,000, 8,000 times with their leg to weave a sari or any sort of thing. And they do this over multiple days, and within very early age they develop all sorts of ailments because of this. So Sriram wanted to work on this, so he started designing semi-automated hand loom that can be retrofitted to this physical one. So we worked with him for around 7 months, and he has developed a prototype and it's being tested. And like this problem has existed in the community for almost like 2 centuries, I guess. So for him to be able to like tackle such a big problem and even engaging with it sort of tells us that he has the belief, and our program is working at some level with him. I think like we like have some stories like that. Yeah.
Thank you, Eshwar, and thank you, Sandhya. We are at the end of an hour. Can you believe how quickly time went? So thank you again for joining us and sharing your stories. Just one note here. I think that what you guys are doing, it's both a passion for the student and the learner, but it's also navigating a system which is incredibly complicated, which is, I think, what Zhao was trying to bring in. Those are two very different kinds of skill sets that you have to bring together. And I'm sure there's a lot of learning of that nature that happens as well. And the fact that you guys are successfully doing that is very impressive. Both of your stories are wonderful. And so thank you so much for sharing that. Just introducing the next episode. So Sandhya, just as when you went back to India and you saw the schools that your daughter was in, we had a previous episode with Kiran Bir Sethi, who started the Riverside Academy or school in Ahmedabad exactly for that reason. And in that episode, we had also had Akash Sethi, who runs this organization called Quest Alliance. So Quest Alliance is going to be one of our guests next episode, not with Akash, but with Priyanka Krishna. And along with that will be Joseph Philip from Reap Benefit. And they'll be speaking about the work that they're doing around developing 21st century skills in schools and in children in India. So really looking forward to that episode. It will be at the same time as today, which is 11 a.m. Eastern. And really looking forward to that conversation as well.